Namaste to everyone. Let me welcome you all to this weekend's Mahabharat. This is 19th weekend of Mahabharat initiative. And yes, today we are going to discuss about the 18th class of Indian history. And that too, this is the third portion of our ancient Indian history. Yes, for the last three classes, if you see, we first discussed about the Mahajanapadas of 600 BC. After that, we discussed about the rise of the first early empire in the Indian ancient history, and that is the Mauryan Empire. And in the last class, if you see, just a 2 to 3 minutes recapitulation, what we discussed in the last class, that is in the Indian history class number 17 and the weekend number 18. Just a small recap, 2 to 3 minutes recap. In the starting of last class, we have discussed that the period 600 BC to around 400 BC, in which on the land of India you see the rise of the Mahajanapadas. So in the early Vedic period, if you see from 1500 BC to around 1000 BC, we have seen the rise of the Janas. Janas means they never have any permanent army, they never have any regular bureaucracy, but the people themselves would mobilize upon the need when and where battles occur, and someone would be there who represents them. People themselves would select the person as the chief of their tribe. So this was the tribal outlook. In the early Vedic period, we have seen the concept of Janas, and later these Janas, especially the four important Janas towards the end of early Vedic period, like Matsya Jana, Puru Jana or Bharata Jana, they have transformed themselves into the latter Vedic Janapadas. That means just till early Vedic period, people were not attached towards the land. But in the latter Vedic period, we have seen that these people now started settling by the practice of agriculture, and that defined the concepts or the communities of farming. So the early Vedic period's Janas became Janapadas of the latter Vedic period, and now the concept of kingship changed. In the early Vedic period, people were choosing the brave person who can protect them well, and they are giving the voluntary tax, voluntary tribute. It was not imposed upon them. They are themselves giving some tribute, some form of tribute to the person, the brave person, so-called Rajan of early Vedic period. But in the latter Vedic period, you would see that has changed. Now when the communities started settling around the, especially around the Delhi and Yamuna regions, in the latter Vedic period, you will see this concept of Raja changes. Now the people have no more chance to select the Raja. So some of the powerful person in the society of latter Vedic period now started claiming self-proclamation of a Raja. So the concept of Jana was having a concept of selection of Raja by people, but the concept of Janapadas of latter Vedic period, now the people lost their opportunity to choose the king, but the most brave and the powerful person who can influence the society himself would proclaim himself as Raja in the latter Vedic period. We have seen that. So this is the concept of Janapadas. So a Raja would be there, he performs the Ashwamedha Yaga, and then he claims certain land has his own, and that's where the monarchy form of polity started in the India. Yes or no? Now, in the last class, we started with the 600 BC period. That means after the end of latter Vedic period, we have seen another change in the society. From early Vedic period to latter Vedic period, Jana became Janapadas. But now, from latter Vedic period to the period of ancient India, from 600 BC to 600 AD, you will see the change not only in the process of selecting the king, but even the process of ruling. The polity changed, economy changed during the time period of 600 BC to 600 AD. So with this connecting line between Vedic period to the ancient Indian period, we started with the the last class. And in the starting of the class, we discussed that Mahajanapadas, there were around 16 Mahajanapadas which rose up on the land of India. 16 Mahajanapadas. Yes or no? We have discussed the Kuru, Panchala, like even the Anga, These were the Hastinapur, Anga, Kuru, Panchala, Avanti. These were some of the Mahajanapadas we have discussed, and these are called as the Shodasha Mahajanapada. So Janapadas of latter Vedic period became now in the ancient Indian starting portion, the first 300 years period from 600 BC to around 300 BC. You see the rise of Mahajanapadas, and among them in the geographical area of today's India, if you see the geographical area of Bihar, Jharkhand, in that area, among these 16 Mahajanapadas of 600 BC to 400 BC, there are two types of form of governments. The system of governance evolved in this period. That is the starting of ancient Indian period. We discussed that among the 16 Mahajanapadas of this period, 600 BC to 400 BC, we see a typical monarchy form of governance, and we also see a typical and earliest democratic form of governance. So some of the Mahajanapadas represented the monarchy form of government, and some other Mahajanapadas would represent the earliest form of democracy on the land of India. Now, this typical form of monarchy means all the power, whether it is legislative power, whether it is judiciary power, or whether it is executive power, all the power lies in one hand. That means one person would behave as the complete concentrator of power. So he would take the decisions of everybody in the society by only one mind, and that was the monarchy form of government. So he would take the decisions around the judiciary, he would take the decisions about the legislature, that means the rules and regulations of society, and he is the person who would take the decisions about the implementation of them also. So the executive power, the legislative power, and even the judiciary power was concentrated in one hand, and that's we call it as monarchy, and that started in the ancient Indian period, that is 600 BC. We have seen, so among the 16 Mahajanapadas, one set of Mahajanapadas represent this typical monarchy form of government, and the first among those Mahajanapadas which represents the typical monarchy was Magadha, and this Magadha kingdom, this Magadha Mahajanapada rose in the areas of Bihar and Jharkhand. So we have seen there are a lot many. So in the last class we discussed about Magadha and another set of Mahajanapadas which represents the earliest democratic form of government, and they are represented by some of the Mahajanapadas like Vajji. So Vajji, they are also called as the Ganas. So Vajji form of governance, that means in the Vajji Mahajanapada you would see not one king but lot of kings. So more number of people would not everybody in the society. It was not a direct democracy, but most of the times to the possible many number of people would be called collectively as Rajas, and they used to meet in assemblies. This is the earliest form of democracy, and we have seen this form of democratic system in the another half of the Mahajanapadas, and one of typical democratic form of governance of ancient India was represented by Vajji Mahajanapada. And from these Mahajanapadas itself we have seen very greatest thinkers of ancient India like Gautama Buddha, like Vardhamana Mahavira. So we have seen they have come from these type of Mahajanapadas. So we discussed, we have taken the two examples, Magadha Mahajanapada and Vajji Mahajanapada during the period 600 to 400 BC. And we discussed about Magadha and Vajji in difference in the last class. So we discussed how Magadha actually, why it was powerful. There are two versions explains it. One of the version was of the early Buddhist and Jainist writers. What they say? They said that the ruthless and ambitious kings of the Magadha actually was the reason for the rise of Magadha. They never considered about the people. They never considered about the another person's opinion. They never took in part or as a decision the people's will. Only one person would take the decisions, and their only aim was to expand the territory and to rule a more geographical area. That was one version explained by the contemporary Jaina and Buddhist writers. And another version why Magadha was powerful was explained by modern historians. We have discussed in the last class that some of the historians said that the presence of the Ganga and other some tributaries, perhaps that was the reason why Magadha rose to power, because once rivers are there, the land would be fertile, and once the land is fertile, you would expect a lot of agricultural productivity. And once the agricultural productivity of the kingdom went up, you could see the taxation system was possible. And once the taxation system was possible, you will see the fortification of the fortification inside the kingdom, and the capital cities fortification you will see. So this is a virtuous cycle of monarchy. Virtuous cycle of monarchy. Please mind my words. Virtuous cycle, but of monarchy. So it is very happy to the kings, but not necessarily to the people. So the presence of Ganga and tributaries was one reason why Magadha was powerful. And modern historians also said another reason. So these reasons, like presence of the forest, because they offered the elephants to the army. The presence of the iron mines, because they offered iron tools and technologies for both the army and the agriculture. So these are some of the reasons why Magadha rose to power. We have discussed it. And in the Vajji part, we also have discussed that how these people should meet. The people used to meet in assemblies, and they used to discuss if some other Vajji or other Mahajanapada would come on to them for a battle, perhaps, how they would tackle it. They used to meet and discuss. This is a democratic form of consultation and deliberation and discussion. So towards the half of the last lecture, we reached a point where the first earliest form of empire has started being established. And in the last class, we discussed how the Mauryan Empire by 321 BC was being established. By whom? The founder of the Mauryan Empire was Chandragupta Maurya. We discussed it. So how Chandragupta Maurya and one of his colleague was Chanakya or Kautilya. So how these two people planned a coup against the Magadhan, the last Magadhan ruler, and how they established the Mauryan Empire. And we discussed that how Mauryan Empire was actually flourished during the period 321 BCE. Now the next period we discussed in the last class, towards the second half of the lecture. 321 BC to 185 BC. So the founder of the Mauryan Empire was Chandragupta Maurya. And during his period, we have seen in the last class that the geographical control was extended as far northwest as Afghanistan and even Baluchistan, and as south as Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. So these we have seen, and we also discussed a bit about the James Prinsep in the last class, because he was the person, James Prinsep, in the 1838, who was an officer in the East India Company of British, who is working in British India. He was the person who deciphered two important scripts, Brahmi and Kharosti scripts. Only through that, our historians and the European historians could sail through the inscriptions and reach this empire. We have discussed all these things. And towards the end of the last lecture, what we discussed was, there are some of the philosophical concepts which were conceptualized by whom? The Ashoka of Mauryan Empire. And we have discussed that philosophical concept called as Dhamma. So what Ashoka, the grandson of the Chandragupta Maurya, during his rule, Mauryan Empire was at its peak. And his rule was from 268 BC to around 231 BC. We have discussed that the reign of Ashoka. And in the last class, we also discussed that how Ashoka conquered the Kalinga kingdom. That means the coastal Odisha. And after that Kalinga conquest, Ashoka was the person who felt the need of peace and non-violence, and he started conceptualizing a new philosophical concept. And what was that concept? Ashokan Dhamma. Yes. So towards the end of our class, we have discussed this Ashokan Dhamma, and the principles, the four important principles we discussed very elaborately. What are they? The first one was to respect the elders. That was the Ashokan Dhamma's principle. And another principle, the second important one, was to show some generosity towards the Brahmanas, and what? Towards the people who renounced their lives. Why Ashoka was telling all these things? Perhaps because Brahmanas who actually lost some control. This is an indication that Brahmana section of the society, after Vedic period, when these Mahajanapadas rose up, and during the period of Mauryan Empire, perhaps they lost some of the power they actually yielded in the Vedic period. And because of this loss of power, maybe Brahmanas were not, at least even feeding their stomachs. And perhaps by seeing this poor state of the Brahmanas, Ashoka would have commissioned those inscriptions to, telling the people, telling the subjects that to please show the generosity towards the Brahmanas and the people who renounced their lives. And the Ashokan third principle we discussed, and that Ashokan Dhamma principle I am speaking about, towards the end of our last class we discussed that. What was that? It was that to please show the kindness. He was telling to the people to please show some kindness and treat that servants and even the slaves of your families alike. So Ashoka was telling to the people to please show kindness. Why? Perhaps Ashoka, during this period, slavery might be, infinitely practiced. And even every rich family or noble family during this Mauryan Empire period perhaps was, hiring one servant. We don't know. But their condition might be not good enough. That's why Ashokan Dhamma principle saying that to show some kindness towards this, to treat them with kindness. Who are they? The servants and the slaves. And the last sentence we discussed in the last class. What was that? Ashokan Dhamma principle was saying that to practice and to nurture the principle of religious tolerance. He is saying that whatever may be your religion, but by then what were the religions we have? We have only Hinduism, and then we have Buddhism and Jainism. Only there are three important, but they are very major religions. And this tells the fourth important principle of Ashokan Dhamma says perhaps even Jainism and Buddhism was countering. They rose to such an extent, such a level that they were countering even the Hinduism. That's why there was some sense of intolerance of one religious people towards the other religious people. And that's why Ashokan Dhamma fourth principle was saying that to show what? To respect the tradition and the culture and religion of other religious section, which is not of one's own. So this is, in brief what we have discussed in the last class. Now, in today's class, let us discuss about the administration of the Mauryan Empire. In the first half, we discussed about the administration of Mauryan Empire. And then we discussed about after the fall of Mauryan Empire by around 200 BC, in the 2nd century BC. After the fall of Mauryan Empire, you will see rise of lot of chiefdoms, lot of kingdoms. Even the further south, for the first time, come into picture of the Indian history. So we will discuss that after administration of the Mauryan Empire. And then we would discuss in the timeline, we would discuss by 200 BC, after the fall of Mauryan Empire, who were the people established their own kingdoms. From 200 BC to 100 BC, and then from 100 BC to the next 3 to 400 BC. Like that, we would conclude today till 600 AD. What is the political lineage of ancient India? And this is the third ancient Indian history class, because we are discussing the polity section. Now, administration of the empire, Mauryan Empire especially, let us speak about it. Sir, as I have said, Mauryan Empire was established in 321 BCE and it was fallen almost by 185 BC. So it is almost a period of 150 years. Just think, if an empire was to sustain 150 years, it would have definitely implemented a lot of different structures which were not there in the previous kingdoms. That's why it could last 150 years, but others, the previous kingdoms, could not. Yes or no? And another important fact here we have to discuss is, we found a lot of inscriptions of Ashoka in the Afghanistan region, in the Baluchistan region, and even in the Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh region. That means perhaps this empire was too vast in its geographical extent. So, for the first time, India got experienced of such an empire. Before that, we never had seen. Indus Valley civilization was only restricted itself to the northwestern portion of the country. And then we have seen early Vedic period, that is also restricted to the Indus Valley, around the Indus river itself. And the latter Vedic period also just a little eastwards from Indus Valley of the present day Pakistan to Ganga Yamuna Doab. And only after 600 BC we have seen the people moved and even habituated, settled in the UP Bihar areas of Ganga plains. So that was the first time we have experienced a very vast empire. We never in the history, in the Indian prehistory or even in the early history till this point, till 321 BCE, we never had seen such a very vast and very powerful empire. So if that powerful and vast empire to sustain, it should have a very, very strongly grounded administrative system. Yes or no? So let us discuss that how Mauryans, right from the Chandragupta Maurya to Ashoka and even the latter Mauryans, how could they able to sustain this empire with their administrative reforms? Let us discuss. Now, see the first point in the administration of the empire. First point I am explaining, please listen. Only if you understand this point, then you will be connected to the latter points. The empire was extending from Afghanistan to Andhra Pradesh, from Bihar to Karnataka. That means with one power center, with one powerful region, maybe in the center of the empire, it could not and it would never be possible to have the control over every point in the empire. Yes or no? Because it was very vast. It was literally not possible to control every land. And that is the reason, because we have been experiencing by this time the first empire on the Indian land mass, we have seen the division of the geographical land into different provinces. So this is very important, because even till today the modern India is having around 28 states. The states are nothing but the provinces. Why? Because one Delhi can never or ever rule over the last tip of the Tamil Nadu. It was not possible. So this division of the empire into provinces is the first administrative reform which was taken up by the Mauryans. So what did they do? By 321 BC, Chandragupta came to the power, Chandragupta Maurya. And in his court, one of the very intellectual called as the Chanakya or Kautilya. And this Chanakya or Kautilya, he is the person who composed, you might have known that, Arthashastra. And this Arthashastra is the text which was composed by Chanakya, which describes to the Chandragupta Maurya, which explains to the Chandragupta Maurya that how an empire like very vastly like Mauryans can be administered. So it is actually the intellectual contribution of Chanakya to the Mauryan Empire. And in that he discusses that first point he discusses is to divide the empire into provinces. That's what Chandragupta Maurya did. And the latter Mauryans also, the peak of Mauryans period was at Ashoka period, from 268 to 231 BC. And during his period you would see there are almost 5 to 6 provinces in the empire, in the Mauryan Empire. So this is the first point in the administration of the empire. What is that? Division of the empire into different provinces. Now, so Ashoka, he divided the provinces, and he was having 5 important provinces, as I have already explained. Let us discuss what are the 5 important provinces. So these provinces are even nothing but they are the political power centers. Political power centers. First, throughout the empire, if you see Mauryan Empire, the capital city of the empire was in the Pataliputra. So what is the first power center or political center among these 5 political centers in the Mauryan period? It is the capital city of the Mauryans, that is the Pataliputra. Pataliputra means the king Ashoka would sit in the Pataliputra, that is at the Bihar of the present day India. So he would sit in the Bihar, and how can he rule the persons who are inside his empire only, but in Afghanistan region? It is very far from Bihar. So the most powerful center was the capital city of the empire, that is the Bihar's Pataliputra, from which Ashoka ruled. But it was literally not possible even to the kings or emperors to rule the last points of the empire. That's why along with the capital city, that Pataliputra, there were 4 other important provincial centers which Ashoka has chosen. Not only Ashoka, but every Mauryan emperor has chosen. And the first political center was Pataliputra, as I have already explained, and the remaining 4 provincial centers are. So they are also just not have chosen randomly, but they are very, modern historians are looking back to the sources, and what we are finding is they are not just randomly picked up provincial centers. They are very strategically, chosen. Strategically chosen, sir. Let us see what are the 4 other, provincial centers. In the complete northwestern empire, if you see the present day Afghanistan and even the Pakistan region, the Mauryan province was controlled with a powerful political center, and that is Takshila. You would have listened to the name of Takshila. So Takshila was one of the very, very, very powerful political center in the northwestern part of the Mauryan Empire. So Takshila, along with the Pataliputra, so the king Ashoka would sit in the Pataliputra, and he would through his messengers give his instructions to the provincial representatives of the king who are sitting in the Takshila. And that's how the king's rules and regulations would be implemented in the northwestern empire. This is how the administration was there, and who contemplated and who explained this to the king. He was the Chanakya or Kautilya. That's the intellectual capacity of Chanakya or Kautilya. Now, so what are the 2 political centers we discussed? One is Pataliputra, the main capital city of empire, and second one is the Takshila, which is in the northwestern portion. And another important political center, the third important political center in Mauryan Empire period is Ujjain. Ujjain is in the present Madhya Pradesh region. And this political center, provincial center would control the lands or the region in the central India. So already Pataliputra was in the eastern side of the empire. So the emperor would exercise the control over it. And the Takshila was towards the northwest. And in the central India, you would find a provincial center like Ujjain. And in the South India also we have found this is very interesting, sir. Not South India exactly, but the Western India, we can say. And one provincial center we could see, which is a part of Mauryan Empire, and it was Suvarnagiri provincial center. Suvarnagiri. Suvarna means gold, Giri means mountain. So it is actually a mountain of gold, which is present in the present day Karnataka. So till Mauryan period, we never found, history of South India in the broader history of India. We never found. Only there are 2 occasions when we study South India, when South India comes into picture. What are they? We have discussed already those 2 incidents. One incident was by 1000 BC, during the latter Vedic period, there is a new custom called as megalithic burials we found in the Deccan and South India. That was one point where we discussed about South India in the Indian history. And the second point when we discussed was during the Indus Valley period. If you see from 2900 to around 1900 BC, we have seen the Indus Valley people were actually procuring gold from where? From Karnataka region. So these are the only 2 occasions on which we discussed about South India. So Karnataka is the land of gold, sir. Karnataka is the land of gold. You would find lot of gold mines in the Karnataka. For that region, perhaps we don't know exactly, but perhaps for that region to exploit the gold mines of Karnataka, even the Mauryan emperors made Karnataka a provincial center, and its ancient name was Suvarnagiri. So Pataliputra is the first center, Ujjain is the second center, Takshila is the third political center, and now we discuss the fourth center, that is the Suvarnagiri. These are the 3 important provincial centers along with capital. But the last one is still very relevant and very strategically chosen. The last one is the cultural provincial center of Maurya. What is that? And to Ashoka especially, personally it was very, very important provincial center. And it is the Tosila provincial center of Odisha. Why Odisha is very, very special to Ashoka? It was special to Ashoka because Ashoka was the emperor who conquered the Kalinga kingdom. Kalinga kingdom means the coastal, Odisha. And the capital city of the Kalinga before his conquer was Tosila. And that's why he retained it. The same status of provincial center, the provincial political control, he was given to the Kalinga kingdom. And it says, even during the Mauryan period, and it says the importance and the significance that Ashoka has given to the Dharma, Ashokan Dharma principles. Even though he conquered Kalinga, he still retained Tosila, the capital city of Kalinga kingdom, the same status even after the conquering of it. And that says how Ashoka was really transformed from inside. It was not just an exaggeration by historians. Perhaps exaggeration was there, but it was not over-exaggeration, because it tells Tosila still was continued as the provincial center. That is how Ashoka actually tried to show to the world symbolically that he was transformed from inside. So, in the administration of Mauryan Empire, we have discussed the political centers. In brief, what are the political power centers? Capital Pataliputra, Takshila Provincial Center, Ujjain Provincial Center, Suvarnagiri Provincial Center in the Karnataka, and the last one was Tosila. And because of the presence of different provincial centers, the political control over the complete empire was significantly possible. This is the first reform, administrative reform, what Mauryan Empire could bring in. Now in the administration of the Mauryan period, we discuss the second point, second important point. So listen, it is very important. We have found lot of inscriptions of Ashoka in the Afghanistan region, I have told, and even in the Baluchistan we found, and even in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh also we found. In the Jammu Kashmir we found. That means throughout his empire, a lot of inscriptions were commissioned. So historians with a special interest, they have deciphered the inscriptions, and for their shock, what they found was the inscription, the message or the content which was there on the Afghanistan's Ashokan inscription, and the same content or the message which we found in the Andhra Pradesh region and even in the Jammu Kashmir region, everywhere you see Ashokan Empire, Ashokan inscriptions majorly having same message. This is very shocking to the historians. Same message. How can it was possible without a very strong administration system? An inscription in Afghanistan was saying the same Dhamma principles, and an inscription we found in the Andhra Pradesh and Odisha region is saying the same message, and an inscription we found in the Jammu Kashmir is also saying the same message. So without a very strong and united administrative system, it was not possible to have same message everywhere throughout the empire. And this tells how grounded the administrative system of Mauryans, which was actually conceptualized by whom? The great intellectual of Mauryan period, Chanakya or Kautilya. This is the second point. This is an example to show that administration system was very strong during the Mauryan period. Now, I said there are 5 important political centers in the Mauryan period. Now let me just pick up randomly and we will understand why only they were selected. For example, Takshila and for example Ujjain. Let us take Takshila and Ujjain. These are the 2 provincial centers or political centers of Mauryan Empire. Why only Takshila? Why emperors chose only Takshila and Ujjain? Historians, when looked at this question, they shocked to find a commonness in them. They were actually very strategically located, sir. Strategically located in such a way, if you see, in the ancient India, between Roman Empire and even the Indian empires. That means between Europe and India, you would see lot of trade was happening. And this trade was both on the land route and the marine route. And the land route trade which happened between Asia and Europe was actually through the Great Silk Road. Great Silk Road, you might have listened. This is actually dominated by the China of that region. The silk which was produced from China would be transported and traded in the Europe through this Silk Road. And Afghanistan was one part of Silk Road. Afghanistan is a part of Silk Road. And even the present day Baluchistan region in which Tosila is present is also one of the part and parcel of Silk Road. And that is why Tosila was chosen as the political center or provincial center. So by the taxes they would receive by giving protection to the traders, because that is a very busy trading route. So normally Tosila was located just along with that Silk Road. Normally they would get a lot of taxes, and that's how the treasury, the royal treasury of the Mauryan empires could be filled up. And this is the reason why Tosila was chosen as the political and provincial center. And not only Tosila, if you see Ujjain, the Silk Road from Tosila, it turns into Delhi region, and from Delhi, that is the present, the then Hastinapur. This trade was, moved forward to the south through the Ujjain, that is in the present day Madhya Pradesh. That's why Ujjain was a commercial capital. It's a very, very commercial provincial capital of empire of Mauryans. See how strategically they are choosing the locations, the provincial centers, Tosila and Ujjain. And let us take another provincial center and see why only that has chosen. For example, if you see Suvarnagiri, which is in the present day Karnataka, as I have explained, this is very strategically located because the complete Mauryan Empire and the royal families were getting the jewelry and gold from whom? From this province, from Karnataka province, and that's why this Suvarnagiri was made a provincial center in the Mauryan Empire. And why Tosali? I have explained. Tosali was a symbolic example that Ashoka and the latter Ashokans wanted to show that they actually transformed from inside. This is how the administration system got grounded to the very strengthened to the ground. Now, so we have discussed this how provincial centers came up, how they were chosen, and now let us just discuss about what actually the importance or even the significance of this administration to the kings, to the emperors. In the last class, I have explained about one person who is very popular in history, ancient history, and his name was Megasthenes. Who was he? Megasthenes is a Greek ambassador to the Chandragupta Maurya court, and he has written something about Mauryan Empire. And in his accounts, very interestingly, we found about one committee actually. What Megasthenes was writing in his accounts was, in the Mauryan court, actually in the Mauryan administration, some of the functions were actually given to the committees. This committee system was actually developed in the early Mauryan period. And what Megasthenes was saying was, there was a committee on military activities. I am just telling about one example, how committee works. And you can imagine how other departments or other committees would have worked in the Mauryan period. He says, Megasthenes says, not me, Megasthenes says, there was a committee on military activities. And inside that committee, there are about 5 important subcommittees also. They made subcommittees and they still divided the military activity functions into 5 different subcommittees. And each subcommittee in the court of Mauryans was dealing with one of the functions. For example, one subcommittee under the military committee was actually taking care of the navy, and the second important subcommittee was taking care of the transport and provisions. Throughout the subcontinent, the transport function, the functioning, for example, if trade has to be flourished, normally the road communication should be very protected heavily. So how that protection to be given to the traders, to the merchants, to the small traders. Throughout the transportation of goods, some protection was to be offered by the emperors, and in return they would get the taxes from merchants. And that's why there was a subcommittee on the transport and provisions. This is the second subcommittee. And the third subcommittee in the same military activities committee which was to take care about the infantry of the army, the soldiers, the foot soldiers, because if trade was to be protected, who should protect them? With every bullock cart of goods, There are about 4 to 5 soldiers, foot soldiers sent, who are the representatives of the emperor. That's how the bullock cart was, the merchant bullock cart was safeguarded. So the infantry was also to be taken care of. Their food needs, their clothes needs, etc. throughout their traveling. And that's how the third subcommittee works, which takes care of the infantry. And there was a subcommittee which takes care of the animals which were involved in this trade. Example, if I have said that bullock cart was being used to carry the goods here and there, bullock cart, that means bullocks should be there, and these animals were to be fed with grass for every in the intermittent time, and that was to be a function of the subcommittee called as subcommittee on what? The horses or the bullocks. This is how Megasthenes was very clearly laid the accounts of Mauryan Empire at the Chandragupta court, especially to say. And because of this introduction of this committee system, and even within the committees, subcommittee system, this Mauryan Empire got still strengthened. They got a lot of taxes, and with them they still became more powerful. This is a virtuous cycle of monarchy. This is how the Megasthenes described about the committees. Now, as I have already explained that administration of the system was strengthened by introducing the provincial systems, by introducing the lot of recognizing the political and power centers, and even by introducing the system of committees and special subcommittees. This is how the administration got strengthened in the Mauryan period. But let me ask you a question, that why actually Mauryan Empire was very relevant to India? Why it is relevant? What is the main significance of this empire? This is the question which Indian historians was looked into, because if an empire was to be really relevant today, it has to be with some good virtues. If not, why it is relevant to us, the present day modern Indians? So that's in that context, some of the historians have studied this period, and they asked to the sources, the inscriptions, the texts, the literature, the coins. They asked the one common question, that why early and even the Mauryan period was significant. Why it was so significant and very relevant? Let us discuss this. So in the last class I have told you one point, that in 1838 James Prinsep was the person who was an officer in the East India Company minting office. He was the person who deciphered the Brahmi script and the Kharosthi scripts. And when he was doing when he was the pioneer of early Indian political history reconstruction, this process was taken up by the British as well as even the Indian historians from 1850s. And by 1910s and 20s, we have our first draft of early political Indian history. And if you clearly observe the period 1838 to 1910s and 20s, all that period, our India was actually subjugated by whom? The British Empire. So James Prinsep himself was a British Indian, not Indian, he is a British officer. So just imagine when Britishers were actually telling the Indians that you have no capability to self-rule, you have no capability to have a responsible government, you are uncivilized. These are the reasons put forward by the British people, especially the East India Company rule. And they justified their rule by saying that you are not fit. They are telling to the people, Indian people, that you are not fit to self-rule. That's why we are ruling you. This is the reason that they used for justifying their rule. But when James Prinsep deciphered the Brahmi and Kharosthi script, and when they found, Indian historians found, that there was a glorious empire of this period, don't you think that this is actually an inspiration to the British, the Indian nationals especially? During the period, please don't think in the present day time, just think in the time period of 1830s to 1910s and 20s. That was the period where the Indian people were actually dreaming of independence, and the British were not giving us independence only on the reason that we are incapable of self-rule. This was the propaganda which propagated by whom? The British India, the British companies, East India Company. And when James Prinsep found this glorious empire, when Indian historians found this glorious empire, they took it as an inspiration, and that has also inspired nationalist leaders of India. This is the one reason why actually Mauryan period was glorified, to some extent exaggerated, but it is relevant, it is justified. It was used, the findings of the Mauryan Empire was used as a tool to the independence movement, because the first early draft of early political Indian history was in place by 1920s. So 1920s was actually the period of Indian mass movements when Gandhiji entered the Indian independence movement. And these Indian nationalists, lot of nationalists, Indian nationalist leaders, they had told the Indian people, inspired the Indian people by telling that yes, we also had a very glorious empire, a very glorious past, by referring to the Mauryan Empire. This is the one reason why actually Mauryan empires and even the findings about Mauryan Empire were relevant to India, especially modern India. Now, yes, this is okay. Yes, we found a very glorious empire and the nationalists were inspired out of it. This is a normal and necessary thing also to the national movement. But this is not sufficient to be very significant, right? So the second point I am going to explain. Please listen, this is very important. The second point why Mauryan Empire is very significant is the art and the architecture that it contributed to India. Sir, when there is a stable government, they only could foster and patron the art in the kingdoms. If there is no stable polity or stable kingdom or stable even the democracies, you can take any type of polity. If there is no stability, they cannot patron the arts. And if there was a spectacular art we found which is attributed to one particular period, that means that must to be a stability period in the Indian history. And James Prinsep was actually deciphered the Brahmi and Kharosthi scripts from what? From the stone pillars, from the stone inscriptions. On the stones to engrave an inscription was a very spectacular art. It is very splendid in nature, and this nature of art, that inscriptions in the literature, in the coins we have seen. So this splendidness and this spectacular art which actually inspired the nationalist leaders, especially during the period of Indian independence movement. And if you see the relevance of Mauryan Empire, it went to the extent even our today's national emblem of India, that is the Sarna, the lion, national emblem of India, we say that, the 3 lions stone sculpture. It was the sculpture which was belonged to the Mauryan Empire. And that's the significance of this Mauryan period. This is the second important reason why Mauryan Empire was very, very significant even to the modern India. But yes, another point I have to say, sir. Yes, as I have told, architecture speaks about the empire. As I have told, the context in which the history was reconstructed played a role by glorification of this empire. But real and genuine reason why an empire like Mauryans was celebrated, because the Emperor Ashoka's message, when we decipher and understand them, interpret them, it looked to the Indian historians very differently from the message of other rulers. For example, what Ashoka was saying, he was saying to respect the elders, which is very universal principle and which is very simple in nature, and even till today this is very relevant. It looked very different because they have deciphered a lot of inscriptions about the medieval period and most of the kings. But what those inscriptions are saying, they are saying to conquer the other lands, they are saying to collect more taxes, etc. But they never find a king saying to the people to respect the elders. It's a shocking incident to the historians. That's why Ashoka was genuinely and even it is very justiciable to project a king like Ashoka as an inspiring figure. Why? Because he was saying very universal and simple principles which are very good virtues to be adopted even by modern Indians. To respect the elders, to show the kindness towards the servants and slaves, and to show generosity towards the Brahmanas and other people, and the religious tolerance. The first foundational stone for secularism of India, the principle of secularism, started during Mauryan period. So these are some of the things which inspired the nationalist leaders, which actually triggered a moment of connectedness to the past, and it triggered lot of emotional attachment to the Indian landmass in the period 1920s and 30s, and this somehow was used as a tool to mobilize the people in the Indian independence movement. So this is about the significance of Mauryan period. And in the administration, perhaps I have missed one point to tell, and that is not only provincial centers, not only this same commissioning the inscriptions, and not only selection of gold mines, etc., the regions as political centers, but another, even forming of committees and subcommittees. There was one very innovative polity, we can say, innovative steps in the polity which was taken by early Mauryan Empire. That was appointment of some of the officers for specific purposes. For example, if you take Ashoka has conceptualized these Dhamma principles. So to spread these Dhamma principles, he appointed a person, a position, a new political position, and that was called as Dhamma Mahajanapadas. Dhamma Mahajanapadas. You might have listened to the position, right? Dhamma Mahajanapadas means they are the officers who spread the message of this Dhamma, Ashokan Dhamma. This is one of the administrative innovative tool of Mauryan period. So this is how this glorious period got strengthened. The Mauryan complete empire was strengthened to the grounds even. But there are some limitations to the Mauryan empire. So we are discussing the Mauryan empire means 321 BC to 180 BC. During this period, yes, even though this was very strongest empire, even though the kings like Ashoka were very universalistic in their approach, very simple in their approach, very humble in their approach. Even the Ashoka was actually powerful person, very industrious person, but still he was very humble person. He never took grand titles like in the latter periods kings. You will see a lot of kings would take the titles like Rajadi Raja, Maharaja Di Raja. But this Ashoka was interestingly never took such grand titles. He was very grounded, very humble person. That's how interested the historians mostly. He took only two very simple titles. You might have seen that the two important titles he took were only Devanampiya. That means pleasure to behold, and God-loving person. Devanampiya was one of the simple title he took, and another title he took was Piyadasi. That means lovable, pleasure to behold. These are the very simple titles. They are not very grand titles, and that tells the titles. Adoption of titles tells about the groundedness and the humbleness of the king Ashoka or Emperor Ashoka. But this glorious empire of early Indian, history was also having some of the limitations. So let us now discuss about some of the limitations of this period. Limitations. What normally the limitations are? For example, the first limitation is that this empire, even though it is very strong in administration, very groundly rooted, it was not survived more than 150 years. So 150 years in the span of history is a very smaller period. So it was only survived for 150 years. This is the first limitation. And the second limitation is that even though we are telling that this is a vast empire from Afghanistan to Andhra Pradesh to Karnataka to Bihar, even though it was very vast, there were some pockets which were not part of the empire before. Inside the empire also there were some pockets which were not a part of the empire. This is, they are like the pockets of non-Mauryans inside the Mauryans. That was the second limitation, I can say. And even one more limitation we can discuss about this period, and that is, as I have already told, that inscriptions everywhere were speaking about same thing. But historians got a question whether did this period was actually having a uniform administrative system. And to this question, most of the Indian historians told and answered that perhaps no, uniform administrative system was not possible. Even though it was very large empire, it was not possible. Why? For example, if you take Afghanistan, its terrain was hilly nature. And if you take Odisha, its terrain was plain. So how can you expect an emperor to rule both the hilly terrains and even the coastal plains with the same rules? It was not possible. Improbable at least, if not impossible. So this uniformity. So this is the third limitation of this Mauryan period, that even though Mauryan period was on a broader sense unified, there were non-uniform of control was existed. Non-uniform of control. For example, around the provincial centers and even around the capital Pataliputra, the power was concentrated. But as we go far away from the provincial centers and capitals, you would never see such strong control of Mauryans. So there is a non-uniformity of control. This is the third important limitation. So because of these limitations, because of these are some limitations I have explained, right? Because of these reasons, by 185 BCE, or to say by 200 BCE, in the 2nd century, you would see this Mauryan and glorious empire started falling down. It fell almost by 185 BC. These are the inherent limitations of the empire. So by 185 BC, we would see the complete fall of the Mauryan Empire. So here ends the Mauryan period. So that's the period from 321 BC to 185 BC. Now, by 200 BC, now we are in the timeline 200 BC. Let us discuss the time period, next 100 years. 200 BC to 100 BC, let us discuss. Sir, for the first time, this period, 200 BC, by 200 BC, you would see, for the first time, the deep South India comes into the picture of history of broader India. For the first time, we would see the deep South. This is the period from 200 BC, you would see a very new concept of kingship, a new notions of kingship. Sir, in the Vedic period, there was a rule. What was that? Only Kshatriyas should become the rulers. But that rule got dissipated by 200 BC, and you would see a lot of non-Kshatriyas would come to power, would rise to power. And even some of the people who are completely outside of Vedic Varnas or caste also could raise the flags and become the kings. And that's how this 200 BC, after the fall of Mauryans, you would see a lot of new chiefdoms, lot of new kingdoms emerge throughout the Indian subcontinent. So let us discuss in general what are they which came after the Mauryans. Sir, there was no one empire like Mauryans after 200 BC, at least till the next 500 to 600 years. There was no one empire. There were lot many kingdoms came up, lot many chiefdoms came up throughout the subcontinent. So they are almost all are contemporaries. In the same period after 200 BC, you will see the rise of lot of kingdoms here and there in the Indian subcontinent. First, let us come from down, that is deep south, and then we move northwards, and we will discuss the contemporary kingdoms from 200 BC. First, deep south. Sir, when you see in the present day Tamil Nadu and Tamil Nadu and Kerala regions, by 200 BC, till 200 BC, how this deep south was there? From 600 BC, when Mahajanapadas in the northern India came up, from that period around till the fall of Mauryan Empire in the North India, till that period, in this Tamil Nadu and Kerala region, you would see the rise of ancient Tamil country called as Tamilakam. So during the period of Mahajanapadas and Maurya's period, we would see the rise of Tamilakam. This is called as the ancient Tamil country, Tamilakam. And by 200 BC, in the northern India, Mauryan Empire got fallen, and in the deep south, this on the remnants of this Tamil country, ancient Tamil country called as Tamilakam, you would see the rise of 3 new chiefdoms. Chiefdoms, they are not kingdoms. They are not even monarchies. They are not even Janapadas like or Mahajanapadas like or even empires. They are just chiefdoms. They are the very oldest form of mobilization of people, we would see. In the northern India, during the period of early Vedic period, we have discussed there were only Janas. People are tribal in their outlook. They used to select one person as chief. That is called as chiefdom. So that repeats in the deep south from 200 BCE. So by 200 BCE, you would see on the land of Tamil Nadu, especially Tamil Nadu and Kerala region, 3 chiefdoms. That means people, the tribal people of Tamil Nadu and Kerala in the deep south, they mobilized themselves into 3 different groups. And one group was called as, in the northern Tamil Nadu, one tribal group rose as a chiefdom, and its name was Cholas chiefdom. And in the deep south, towards the southern Tamil Nadu, you would see the rise of Pandyas by the 200 BC. And towards the Kerala region, the rise of Cheras. So Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras, these are the 3 chiefdoms. After 200 BC, we would see in the deep south. Cholas, Pandyas, Cheras. Now, what is a chiefdom? How it is very different from kingdom or Mahajanapadas or Mahajanapadas? Let us. So, what are the 3 chiefdoms? Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras. The difference between chiefdom and a kingdom or an empire is, chiefdoms are the oldest forms. First, all the kingdoms passed through the phase of these chiefdoms. First, tribal people would be there. They would be mobilized into one group called as tribe. In the northern India, we have seen during the early Vedic period, the tribes called as Puru or Matsya or Bharata, they became chiefdoms, and later they became Janas and Janapadas. That's how. So this is the starting point. By 200 BC, in the Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras, you would see the rise of chiefdoms. That means people would mobilize themselves and choose one person as chief, and this chief was powerful. What are the characteristics of the chief in a chiefdom of Cholas and Pandyas and Cheras? Let us discuss. The first characteristic to be a chief is being powerful. So this chief of these people, either the Cholas or Pandyas or Cheras, they are powerful. And sometimes, most of the times, the chiefs are non-hereditary. That means only those who are having the quality of braveness, having the quality of powerfulness, only people would be selecting them or electing them in a way in the chiefdoms. But most of the times they are non-hereditary. Sometimes they are hereditary. This chiefdom, the position of chief was sometimes hereditary. And what does this chief actually do in a chiefdom? In the Cholas and Pandyas and Cheras, this chief is the person who participates in the rituals, and even he places the position of leadership. He plays the role of leadership during the warfares or the battles with other chiefs. And the most important thing about this chief is he was an elected chief mostly. So he never imposed tax on the people. He never having any unwilling unpopularism in the people. Mostly he gets the support of his kinfolk. This is how the chiefdoms are different from kingdoms, and these are the qualities of the chiefs, I said. But the important main characteristics, what differentiates a chiefdom from kingdom is, a kingdom would always have 2 important systems. They are the system of bureaucracy and the system of army. But these chiefdoms never have army, and the chiefdoms never have regular bureaucracy. This is a very, very important point, sir. Remember this fact. So yes, we have discussed by 200 BC towards the deep south, the rise of 3 chiefdoms after the fall of Mauryan Empire in the northern India. What are they? Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras. And we discussed the qualities of being a chief. And now let us discuss what are the sources. How could we know? How would we know that there were chiefdoms like Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras? What is the source? During the Mauryan Empire, we have discussed the sources like architectural evidence, like literature, like Ardhashastra, like Megasthenes accounts and like Ashokan inscriptions. Just like that, What are the sources which speaks about these Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras? The main important source which speaks about them was after 200 BC, and that source were the Tamil Sangam texts. So these are very very important, sir. Tamil Sangam texts. These are actually the collection of poems. And what this Tamil Sangam text describes about? They describes about the chiefs of these chiefdoms. The chief of the Cholas, the chief of the Pandyas and the chief of the Cheras. They describe about them. And not only that, these Tamil Sangam texts would describe about how these chiefs were acquiring the wealth and how they are distributing it among the people. This is the content of the poems. So it is normally collection of poems, Tamil Sangam text. Just like you are getting some similarity, right? In the early Vedic period, when chiefdoms came in the northern India, we have seen the composition of Rigveda, which was poetic in its sense, which describes about different gods and etc. In the same way, as the chiefdoms came in the deep south, we also have seen the composition of the Tamil Sangam text. That's why we call this Tamil Sangam text as the Tamil Vedas. You are connecting, right? That is the similarity between how the people would mobilize and how polity develops. So this Tamil Sangam text speaks about the Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras, and this Tamil Sangam text also called as the Tamil Vedas. This is what happening in the deep south. Now in the same period, just after the fall of Mauryans, what was happening when these Cholas, Pandyas, Cheras were rising in the deep south? What was happening in the Deccan and the Western India? Let us discuss. Deccan and Western India means the present day Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka regions. So after the fall of Mauryan empires by 200 BC, when in the deep south, when these chiefdoms are coming up, Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras, we have seen the rise of Satavahanas or Satavahanas. Sata means 100, Vahana means vehicles. So these Satavahanas came to power by 200 BC. When the Mauryan Empire got fallen in the northern India, in the western and Deccan India, we have seen the rise of Satavahanas, contemporaries to the Tamil chiefdoms. And one commonness between these Tamil kings and even the Satavahanas was they are non-Kshatriyas. As I have told that by 200 BC, this tradition, this convention of Vedic period, that only Kshatriyas should become the rulers, that got broken by 200 BC. And you will see Satavahanas are non-Kshatriyas. They are non-Kshatriyas, but still they rose to power and they established the Satavahana kingdoms. So Satavahanas, they ruled over the western and the Deccan area. In the same period, from 200 BCE, they lasted till 200 AD, almost 400 years of period. That's what happening in the Deccan and the Western India. And when we see just a little north of that, in the region of Gujarat and Rajasthan, what was happening after the fall of Mauryan empires? Let us see. By 200 BCE, we have seen the rise of Shakas. They are the contemporaries, just like Satavahanas and Tamil chiefdoms. In the Gujarat and Rajasthan region, we found the rise of Shakas. And who are these Shakas? These Shakas are actually the Central Asian origin people. They came from Central Asia. That means they are also non-Kshatriyas. So they ruled from around 100 BC to 100 CE. For 200 years they ruled. We are coming the timeline. 200 BC, Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras came up in the deep south. From 200 BC, Satavahanas also came up, that means the contemporaries. And from 100 BC, we have seen the rise of Shakas. They are also non-Kshatriyas. So you will see that there is a change, a new notion of kingship in how the kingdoms are established. And now, sir, just imagine if now the non-Kshatriyas are becoming the kings by 200 BC, would you believe that people are just accepting them like that? Because for thousands of years, at least 1,000 years, they are seeing only the Kshatriyas as rulers. But for the first time, non-Kshatriyas also became rulers. So would you think that people just accept like that? No, right? So normally these kings have to do something to get the legitimacy of the people. So to claim, I'm telling the exact point, to claim the higher status, they have to do something. So this concept of doing something to please the people, to get the sanction from the people to rule, or to get the legitimacy of the people, to accept them as the rulers, even though despite they are non-Kshatriyas, these kings, either Satavahanas or Shakas or even the Tamil kings, started doing something to claim the higher status. And one such thing was land grants. Especially who are the people who counters this move when non-Kshatriya came to power? Brahmanas normally counter this move. Why? Because Brahmanas are the people who actually written in the Dharma Sutras that only Kshatriya should become the ruler. So when a non-Kshatriya like Satavahana or Shaka or Tamil king would become the king, normally who are the people who don't like it? It was the Brahmanas. That's how, to please the Brahmanical section, you would see a lot of grand land grants started by these Satavahanas, by these Shakas, by these Tamil kings. And this is the moment, so just listen, this is the moment from 200 BC when Satavahanas, Shakas and Tamil chiefdoms started granting lands to the Brahmanas. This laid the foundation stone for the medieval India to come after 600 BC. This is the foundational stone where land grants started. Please just remember this point. We would discuss this point in the medieval period, because this laid the foundation for medieval period's feudalism. Medieval period was characterized by Zamindarism, feudalism, Jagirdarism. So all these isms of Jagirdar, Zamindar, feudal, all these have actually come from this point of time. This land grants, a lot of lands given to one particular person as a grant. This started from Satavahanas, Shakas and Tamil. Why? To please the Brahmanical section. Why? Because they are non-Kshatriyas. Why? Because Brahmanas never accepted them. So by the land grants, they started accepting them as the rulers. And once Brahmanas accepts, everyone will accept in the society. That's what the strategy was. So land grants were started in that scenario. This is what happening by 100 BC after Shakas. But this concept, it was limited by giving the land grants, at least temporarily some of the Brahmins would accept it, but some conservational Brahmanical section or the orthodoxy of Brahmanical section would never even accept the land grants. They would question on the values they put. Being a non-Kshatriya, you are not deserved to be a king. This is what the orthodox section would say. So this is very, limited concept, limited strategy, land grants. That's why you will see the shift to get the legitimacy. There was a shift by 100 CE after Shakas. These are the contemporary people in the south, Tamil chiefdoms, in the west, in the Deccan and western regions, Satavahanas, in the Gujarat and Rajasthan region, you will see the Shakas. And by 100 CE, as a contemporary to all this, already they are occupied this western, south and the western subcontinent. Only the rest which was to be occupied was northwest. And that northwest was occupied by whom? By 100 CE, you will see the rise of Kushanas. Their main center was from Afghanistan. Their capital city was in the Afghanistan, Kandahar. From there they ruled. These Kushanas, their empire was actually very strong from Central Asia to northwestern India. So that smaller portion of northwestern India, like the present day Punjab of Pakistan and our India, and the Delhi region, western Uttar Pradesh region, this region of northwest India, northwestern subcontinent to say specifically, was occupied, because there was the only rest spot to be occupied by Kushanas, who are actually ruling from Central Asia to this point. And these Kushanas introduced a new concept to gain the legitimacy of the people, a new concept of claiming the higher status, and that is divine kingship. So by 100 BC, from 100 BC, you would see divine kingship, the notion of divine kingship. Not even land grants worked well with everyone. So they started the concept of divine kings. So it was started from Kushanas. Now, What is this divine queenship which Kushanas started to please the people? Because Kushanas are also non-Kshatriyas. So normally the northwestern people were habituated for Kshatriyas only to rule them from since the ages of Vedic era. So to get the legitimacy of the people, what the Kushanas told to the people was they are actually identified, the rulers of Kushanas identified themselves with the deities directly. With the gods, they said they are the demigods, they are the representation of the god. And that's how they said they appealed to the people to accept them as rulers. And to tell this idea of identification with the deity, what they did was they have taken a lot of initiatives. For example, the first thing what Kushanas did was they minted gold coins. They are the first people who minted the gold coins. This coinage was started from Mahajanapadas itself. First punch-marked coins were there. After then copper coins in the Mauryan period. Even punch-marked coins. After that you will see silver coins and lead coins. Period of Satavahanas. And by 100 BC, these Kushans, already by 100 BC, Tamils were ruling in the deep south, Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras. In the Telangana, Maharashtra and these Madhya Pradesh regions, Satavahanas were ruling. In the Gujarat region, Shakas were ruling. And in the northwestern region, Punjab and Uttar Pradesh region, you will see the rule of Kushanas. And these Kushanas started issuing gold coins for the first time in the Indian country. In the Indian landmass, the first kingdom, first empire which was issued the gold coins was the Kushanas. But actually this empire was operating from Afghanistan. Its central position is not in India, but Indian subcontinent, northwestern part was part of it. So through issuing gold coins, they are telling to the people that on the gold coins they minted the faces of the rulers, the image of the rulers. Why? To tell the people that we are gods. And that's how they wanted to get the legitimacy of the people. Coins. And second point was literature. Kushanas even did produce lot of literature and stories which says that these rulers are actually the representatives of gods, avatars, etc. And during the same period you will see another new initiative by Kushanas to please the people, to get the legitimacy of people. And that is the initiative of constructing colossal statues of the rulers. So today you will see a statue of a politician on every street. It is we take it for granted. But this actual concept of statues, constructing the statues, erecting the statues started from Kushanas. And why? Because it is to tell the people that they are actually gods. Because they are non-Kshatriyas, Brahmanas don't accept them, people don't accept them. That's why, to please them, they started constructing the statues, colossal statues. This is the second step. After coins, these are the second steps to taken by the Kushanas. And once two such statues we found. One is in the Uttar Pradesh, in the Madhura region. There is a mutt. Actually, mutt is a religious place. Mutt. Inside that mutt, there is a shrine, a temple-like thing. And inside that shrine, we found the statue of a Kushana ruler. That tells what actually they wanted to tell to the people. A strong stand, just like you might have seen the movies like Bahubali in which statues were erected. That is the medieval period they depict. But that was started in the ancient period itself by 100 BC by Kushanas. Statues construction. In Afghanistan itself, inside a shrine, we found a statue of Kushana ruler. So these are the sources how we found about the Kushanas. So when this was happening from 100 BC to around, all these kingdoms like Satavahanas, like Tamil kingdoms, like Shakas, like Kushanas, they ruled till at least 200 and 250 AD. I mean, 100 BC was the starting period of Kushanas, and that once zero was started, AD series starts. And after that, for 200 years, they lost it. By 250 AD, like that, you would see all these smaller kingdoms especially in the northern India, you would see all these smaller kingdoms fall, and the second important ancient Indian empire was to be established by 300 AD. After Mauryan Empire, we have not seen a single empire which ruled throughout at least North India. We have Shakas, we have Kushanas, we have Satavahanas. Like a lot of people were ruling. But by 300 AD, now we came to the last portion of the ancient Indian polity. That is 300 AD to 600 AD. And in this period, you will see the second empire of India, ancient India, which is considered as the most glorious period of ancient Indian period. That is the period of Guptas. So all these Satavahanas, Shakas, Kushanas, they all culminated, they all fell, and by 300 AD, you would see in the North India the rise of what? Gupta Empire. The rise of the Gupta Empire. And there are some statements which I have to explain you, which historians say about this period. Because this is the last period of ancient India, 300 AD to 600 AD. By 600 AD, ancient India completes and we enters into medieval India. So being this is the last 300 years period, after Mauryan Empire, we never saw any such empire in the Indian landmass, in the ancient India. And this is the time period, 300 AD to 600 AD, we found an empire called Gupta Empire, which is considered as the peak of Hinduism based kingdoms, which is considered to be the peak of Indian cultural renaissance. Culturally, India got, it was like a cultural renaissance of India. You would see a lot of, for example, there is a statement that the gold, jewelry and valuable gems, precious, semi-precious stones were just selling on the roads in the Gupta Empire. You might have listened these, statements. That's how this period, which is a very rich period of Indian history, culturally rich, religiously rich, Hinduism was at peak during this period. Gupta Empire. And there were only two empires which were, showcased on as the peak of Indian history. Only two empires were there like that. One empire was in the ancient Indian period, that is Gupta Empire. Another empire, in the same manner that gold and jewelry was sold on the roadside. This statement is applied for two empires. One is Gupta Empire in the ancient Indian period. Another empire is Vijayanagara Empire in the medieval period. So Vijayanagara Empire is also Hinduism based kingdom. It also flourished economically, religiously and even culturally. So Gupta Empire was actually that much important to the India. Because this is, by the fall of the Guptas, you would see the fall of actual Indian, the so-called ancient Indian states and kingdoms. And you would see the rise of, lot of medieval polity we will discuss. This is about the Guptas, and let me tell you the sources. How we could know about these Guptas? The first source is about literature, because you would see in this Guptas period, 300 AD to 600 AD, first time lot of literature was produced on the medicine, lot of literature produced in the scientific domain, especially astronomy. Lot of books were written on astronomy. Lot of books written on the mathematics, lot of books composed on the mathematics, on the geography, on the geology. So in all the domains of science, you will see the Indian contribution belonging to from the Guptas itself. Gupta's period itself, you will see a lot of contribution of India in the science and in the religion, in the everything, rational thinking. The cultural renaissance happens in this period. Khagola Shastra, like this you might have listened. Khagola Shastra, or even the Charakas, medicinal books, etc. All these were actually belonging to this Gupta's period. Now, the sources. One is the literature. Second one is the coins. Coins were a very good source about this Gupta's period. And the third one was the texts. Lot of texts were written. I have already told. Lot of texts on the maths, science, social, etc. And even the important, Guptas, very, very specific about important Gupta period's sources is inscriptions. Yes, Ashoka was also commissioned inscriptions, but some innovative inscriptions came up during this Gupta period, which became the main sources to study Guptas. And those are, inscription means any content or information which was written on a stone. That information, the type of information, based on the type of information, we call it as one type of inscription. During Ashoka times, it was instructive inscriptions to proclaim the Dhamma, to propagate the Dhamma. But during Gupta's period, you will see a special inscriptions called as Prashastis. Prashasti inscriptions. Prashasti means these are very typical inscriptions. You would see that Gupta Empire, emperors would be there, and in every emperor's court poets would be there. And these court poets actually write or compose a material, a content, literary material, which was to be engraved on the stones and everywhere. And that inscription, which is actually containing about these poets would praise their emperors, their kings. They would always praise their kings. My king is very intellectual, my king is very great, he was very brave, he conquered everything. This is how these inscriptions were written by these poets, court poets. Why? Because they get patterns from the king himself. And these type of inscriptions are called as the Prashasti inscriptions. I will tell one example of such inscriptions. Sir, in the present day Allahabad area, we have found an inscription which is belonging to Gupta period, and we call this as the Allahabad inscription. But in the older language, if I have to say, we call it as Prayaga Prashasti. Prayaga means, actually it is the ancient Indian name of Allahabad, Prayaga. And Prashasti means it's a type of inscription in which kings are praised by their court poets. So in this Prayaga inscription, what we found was actually, this inscription was actually about the Gupta king called as Samudragupta, who is the most famous among all the Guptas. Just like Ashoka was famous in the Mauryan Empire, Samudragupta is very famous in the Gupta Empire. And just as Maurya was Mauryans, and even in the court of Chandragupta Maurya, Megasthenes was there, court ambassador like that, court poet, etc. In this Gupta's period, in the court of Samudragupta, there was a court poet called as Harishena, and this Harishena composed this Prashasti, Prayaga Prashasti about Samudragupta, and it is in the Sanskrit. What it was written on that was, Samudragupta was a very brave king, he was very talented, he was well versed in all the languages, and he was very trained in all the arts, etc. This is how the exaggerated view of kings. But still historians look towards them because they are very important, sir. Why? If we cut all these exaggerations, historians will directly go and find the core of the information, and in that core you will find the factual information. For example, Samudragupta was a very great conqueror who conquered some surrounding kingdom. Name would be there. This very great, how great, this we will cut, and we would reach out the core fact. What is that? He conquered the surrounding state, and its name would be there. This is how the reconstruction of Gupta's period happened. So Prashastis are very, very important sources to the historians. So by 600 AD, you would see even this glorious Gupta Empire would fall. And from there starts the medieval Indian polity. So what we discussed today? First, in the starting of the class, we discussed about the administration of the Mauryan Empire. And then we discussed about the significance or importance of Mauryan Empire. Later on, by 200, we came to 200 BC, and from there we discussed about the southern chiefdoms called as the Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras. After that, we discussed about the Satavahanas who came in the western and Deccan region. And after that, we discussed about the Shakas by 100 BC. And all these are contemporaries, the Tamil kingdoms, the Satavahanas, the Shakas in the Gujarat area, and in the northwestern area we have seen the rise of Kushanas. Till 200 AD, these are the smaller kingdoms which flourished. But by 300 AD, all these got suppressed in the northern India. All have fallen, and a new empire called as second largest empire of ancient India called as the Gupta Empire came up. Guptas. And this lasted for 300 years, and by 600 AD, even Gupta Empire got fallen. And this is what the polity of the ancient Indian period, from 600 BC to 600 AD. From Mahajanapadas, after that, just a small brief introduction, brief conclusion. 600 BC to 600 AD is the ancient Indian period. 600 BC to 400 BC Mahajanapadas. 321 to 185 BC is the Mauryan period. 200 BC to after 200 BC we have seen contemporary kingdoms like Tamil kingdoms, Satavahanas, Shakas, Kushanas till 200 AD, and from 300 AD to 600 AD the rise of the Guptas. This is what the ancient Indian polity is. For the last 3 classes we discussed the polity. In the first class we discussed Mahajanapadas, and then we discussed Mauryas in 2 classes, and in the last class we discussed about this is the ancient Indian history class number 3, I hope. So in this we discussed the remaining portion from Ashoka to Guptas. This is the polity, only the polity portion we discussed in these 3 classes. And from the next class, in the next weekend, we start with the societal portion. Not society, I'm sorry, the economy of the ancient Indian period. Economy portion from 600 BC to 600 AD, how the economy was changed. This is how political contours we have seen. In the same way, economic contours we will see from 600 BC to 600 AD. In the by the next week we will start the economy of ancient Indian history. And you know, as I always say, in the comments and description I would place the class PDF, and please go through that and study well and understand India well. This is what the Mahabharata is about. And till then, thank you.
This is your SR. Thank you.
अथ श्री महाभारत कथा।